Life is full of surprises, impossible to predict. I thought about this that night, sitting alone in the small hotel room. My husband, Javier, was away in another city for the past few months, which had already made me incredibly tense. Of course, I missed him, but it wasn't just his absence, it was his disinterest, his lack of attention that truly gnawed at me. The lonely nights consumed my soul. But how could I have known that asking my stepson, Mateo, to take me to his father would end with the two of us stuck together in a hotel room, a small hotel room with only one bed? I had no idea what was about to happen. Let me tell you everything from the beginning, every little detail. Believe me, the ending of this story is going to be far more exciting than you expect. That morning, as I left the house, I caught a quick glimpse of myself in the mirror. I was tense, yes, but I still looked good. Even with Javier leaving me so alone, I still felt desirable. I still felt alive. But even those feelings were no longer enough. They didn't satisfy me. In the kitchen, Mateo was finishing his breakfast when I called out to him from behind. You're starting university at the end of the summer, I know, but you need to improve your driving. Come on, take me to your father. He looked at me with that same cheeky smile he always wore. Mateo was a sweet kid with a quirky and funny side, but sometimes he could be a bit of a troublemaker. All right, stepmom, he said in a teasing tone, but on one condition, tell Dad to buy me a better car for the summer. We'll talk about that later, I said sharply, rushing to get this trip over with. But I had no idea the journey wouldn't go as planned. We'd been driving for about 2 hours. I was in the back seat, fiddling with my phone while Mateo hummed random songs on the radio, occasionally cracking silly jokes that only he found funny. Suddenly, the car made a horrible noise, a hiss, and then completely shut off. What's wrong? I asked, trying not to sound too scared. I think the car broke down, Mateo muttered, pulling over to the side of the road, clearly annoyed. So there we were, stranded in the middle of nowhere. My phone barely had a signal, and there wasn't a soul around to help us. We spent 2 hours arguing, calling every mechanic we could find, and trying to fix the damn thing. Eventually, we had to accept the obvious. The only option was to spend the night at the nearest motel. At the motel reception desk, while Mateo talked to the guy at the counter, I stood behind him, frustrated as hell. If Javier finds out about this, he's going to be furious, I thought. But strangely, in that moment, it didn't seem to matter much. Deep down, I just knew this night was going to change things. Before this story gets even crazier, make sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications. Trust me, you don't want to miss the rest of this. I'd love to see your support in the comments and with those likes. When we got to the room and opened the door, all my expectations came crashing down. The space was tiny, barely big enough to turn around in, a bed, a small nightstand, a flickering light on the ceiling that made everything look dim. The ceiling felt low, the air conditioning barely worked, and the only small window looked out onto the parking lot. This is it? I muttered. Mateo's grin irritated me, but at the same time, it ignited something inside me that I couldn't explain. And though I hated to admit it, the idea of being stuck here alone with Mateo tonight didn't seem so bad. Mateo walked in behind me, laughing. What were you expecting, a 5-star hotel? We're only here for one night. Relax, stepmom. That teasing tone in his voice, along with that mischievous smile, only made my frustration worse. But at the same time, I couldn't say I completely hated his carefree and relaxed attitude. Being around him, though I'd never admit it, stirred something inside me, a kind of thrill I didn't fully understand. This heat is killing me, I said, rubbing my arms. Mateo casually threw himself onto the bed, lying on his back. This is your kingdom, Carmen. Do what you need to feel at home, he said with a smirk. I looked at him for a second. His lean but toned body, mixed with the slight boyishness of his face, gave him a strange kind of charm. But I quickly tried to shake that thought out of my head. After all, he was Javier's son, my stepson. I went into the bathroom and closed the door behind me. For a moment, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My hair was stuck to my skin from the heat, but I still looked good. I still had that spark. I turned on the shower, letting the water run, and stepped under it, hoping it would wash away the mess of emotions building up inside me. I'm 47 years old, I thought, and Mateo isn't a kid anymore. He's 22, about to start university, and here we are, stuck in this small hotel room for a couple of days. The thought unsettled me and excited me in a way I couldn't describe. Javier came to mind. Javier, I wanted to surprise you. I wanted to go see you, be with you. But now I'm here, stuck in this hotel room with your son, and I don't know how to feel about it. The steam from the shower filled the small bathroom. The heat relaxed my body while my mind raced. Mateo's smile, his easygoing nature, it was igniting something unexpected inside me. Standing under the stream of water, I couldn't tell what this spark would become. But I knew something was changing. Later, I decided to go downstairs for dinner, to clear my head. I put on a light, flowy dress. It was perfect for the heat, but it also made me feel a bit calmer, as if I were trying to shake off this strange tension. The hotel restaurant was simple, but cozy, fitting for such a small place. I ordered a light meal and a glass of wine, hoping it would help me relax. The sun had set, and the streetlights outside the hotel glowed softly. Sitting there, I couldn't help but let my mind drift back to the room upstairs. I wonder what Mateo is doing now, I thought. Someone as restless and full of energy as him was probably not having much fun cooped up in such a small room. But somehow, his relaxed, carefree attitude was driving me crazy. In a way I couldn't explain, when my wine was finished, I gave my plate one last glance and climbed the stairs, taking slow steps. When I reached the room, everything was so quiet. I opened the door, and the image that greeted me momentarily took my breath away. Mateo had showered and was lying on the bed, wearing only a robe, completely asleep. His robe was slightly open, revealing most of his slender and toned body. His damp hair fell over his forehead, and he had a faint smile on his lips, as if he were dreaming. My heart began to race. It was the last thing I expected to see. For a second, I froze at the door, not knowing what to do. Inside me, there was a strange mix of emotions. I felt embarrassed, but I couldn't look away from him. Carmen, what the hell are you doing? He's Javier's son, I scolded myself internally. But my eyes betrayed me, drawn to the part of his robe that had slipped open even more. What I saw stirred something warm inside me. The small size of the room only made things worse. There was no other bed, I either slept next to him or spent the night in a chair. And with this heat, the idea of the chair seemed impossible. I entered the room, slowly. The steady, rhythmic sound of Mateo's breathing filled the space. I took a deep breath, trying to focus, but the chaos inside me kept me from thinking clearly. I had to pull myself together. It's fine, Carmen, I murmured to myself. It's just one night, nothing more. This doesn't mean anything. I wanted to surprise Javier, and now I'm stuck here. Be rational. Stay calm. I took a few steps toward the bed and looked at Mateo. The innocent expression on his face only made my already tangled thoughts even more complicated. I sat on the edge of the bed, wondering how I was going to get through the night. In the middle of the night, a soft sound woke me. I barely opened my eyes, just enough to scan the room. I noticed Mateo stirring in bed. He seemed half asleep, running his hands through his hair and lightly scratching his head. I found myself watching him but kept my eyes only partially open, pretending to still be drowsy. Inside, however, I was anything but calm. Then I felt it, his eyes on me. My heart started to pound. He was looking at me. I tried to keep up the act, maintaining a sleepy expression on my face and staying still. But inside, I was buzzing with energy. Slowly, Mateo began to untie the belt of his robe. As it loosened, the robe slipped from his shoulders, revealing his young, toned body. The way his muscles moved slightly with his motions sent a strange warmth through me. I couldn't help it. In that moment, I realized two things. One, I knew exactly what was happening, and two, a part of me didn't even want to stop it. Mateo pulled a pair of shorts from the closet. As he did so, he kept glancing at me out of the corner of his eye, as if trying to figure out whether I was awake. His glances excited me even more. I was trying not to reveal anything, but at the same time, I let the moment completely consume me. After putting on the shorts, Mateo didn't return to the bed. Instead, he sat in the chair in the corner of the room and simply began watching me. Being observed with such intensity was unsettling and, at the same time, stirred something indescribable deep within me. I kept my eyes closed, pretending to sleep. But how long could I keep up this act? Eventually, I couldn't hold it in any longer and sat up. When my eyes met Mateo's, I made sure not to hide what I was feeling. "You're exciting me a lot, Mateo," I felt those words hanging in the air. At that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Mateo's eyes blinked for a second, then he took a deep breath and started to speak. "I don't know, Carmen," he said in a low but firm voice. "We've been under the same roof for a while, ever since my dad left. And the more time we've spent together, the more I feel for you. You might not realize it, but sometimes I can't hide the admiration I feel for you. Right now, this feels like some kind of dream." His words took me by surprise, but also stirred something within me. Mateo didn't look away. His eyes held mine with a kind of honesty and passion that completely captivated me. "I have to get up early to fix the car," he continued, though his voice sounded like he was trying to convince himself. But his gaze didn't waver for a second. "But right now, I can't take my eyes off you, Carmen. I've never felt this way before." My heart pounded wildly. At that moment, I moved to the edge of the bed and sat in the chair, directly in front of him. My eyes locked onto his. The energy between us was so intense that words weren't needed. We sat in silence for a moment before I slightly pursed my lips and fixed my gaze on him. "Mateo," I said slowly, my voice conveying both curiosity and a challenge. "Are we talking about the same thing?" Mateo's gaze deepened, as if he wanted to live this moment through feelings rather than words. He didn't respond, but the look in his eyes said everything. And that was when I realized there was no turning back for us. I looked into his eyes, and a surge of courage and uncontrollable desire welled up within me. The mix of hesitation and passion in his eyes only drove me further. Taking a deep breath, I began to speak again, my voice calm but firm. "Mateo," I said, drawing all his attention. "When I entered the room, you were asleep. Your robe was slightly open, and I couldn't stop looking at you. It affected me more than I expected. We can't run away from these feelings, we both know that." As my words hung in the air, I stepped forward and slowly stood up. His eyes followed every one of my movements, his breathing quickening. I couldn't contain the emotion coursing through me. My fingers reached for the sash of my dress, and as I untied it slowly, I could hear the change in his breathing with every movement I made. "I think," I said in a trembling voice, "we need to level the playing field." Slowly, I unzipped the back of my dress. The fabric slid off my shoulders and fell to the floor. The cool air brushing against my skin only made the heat inside me burn even stronger. The look in his eyes said it all: surprise, admiration, and an irresistible attraction. The silence between us felt like a bond. Now, our breaths mingled. Without breaking eye contact, I took another step toward him. "Now," I said softly, "let's see if we're really talking about the same thing." Mateo's eyes remained fixed on me, his expression firm and full of fire. Suddenly, he stood up without breaking his gaze and turned on the room's light. The soft glow filled the space as he approached and locked the door. My heart began to pound wildly. In that moment, it felt as though the entire world had slowed down, leaving only the two of us. When he stepped toward me, my breathing quickened. He seemed to be trying to read my eyes, but at the same time, he was fully aware of the silent attraction between us. As he came closer, his hands found my waist, and the warmth of his touch felt like an electric current running through me. Without saying a word, he leaned in, his eyes dropping to my lips. I didn't resist, I couldn't. Everything about this felt natural, as though it was meant to happen. When his lips finally met mine, all the tension within me melted away. His kiss was slow, exploratory, but filled with undeniable passion. My hands instinctively reached for his shoulders, feeling his strength and warmth envelop me. The space between us disappeared completely as our breaths mixed. That moment felt like an explosion of all the unspoken emotions between us. Mateo's youth and energy collided with the depth of passion I had carried for years. It was the beginning of something, both terrifying and exhilarating. That night, there was no longer any way to hide what we felt for each other. I fell back onto the bed, my body exhausted but my mind racing. My breathing was still uneven. My foot brushed against the fabric of my dress lying on the floor. I felt Mateo's eyes on me, an intense and silent energy radiating from his gaze. A moment later, he leaned down and picked up the dress, his fingers lightly grazing the spot where my foot had been. Even that simple act sent sparks through me. As he held the dress, I saw a brief flash of hesitation on his face, but it was quickly replaced by determination. He set the dress aside, and his hands moved to the edge of the bed. Slowly, he climbed onto the mattress, his movements careful and deliberate. As he got closer to me, the expression on his face betrayed his feelings, equal parts excitement and magnetic attraction. As he lay on the other side of the bed, I could feel Mateo's closeness. My heart was still pounding. My breathing grew deeper as I watched him lean toward me. The distance between us had almost completely disappeared. It was as though everything had reached a tipping point. There was no turning back, and what I felt inside me at that moment was overwhelming. It hurt and excited me at the same time. I stared at the ceiling and could see Mateo's face. I was fascinated by the way he brushed his hair back from his forehead with his hand. I could see in his eyes what Mateo was feeling. He was flushed, he was excited, and he was so happy. I could see he was doing everything with great passion, and it moved me how breathless he was. Mateo had heightened my emotions to the point where I was glad the car had broken down. "I'll never forget this hotel," Mateo said in a trembling voice, his words forced, each as heavy as a gasp. His eyes were fixed on me, but his hands trembled slightly. His body was tense, his muscles contracting, each movement a little more careful and precise, as if he wanted to preserve the memory. "I definitely don't want my father to sell the car ever again," he added. And after those words, he lay down beside me, closed his eyes, and waited for his breathing to recover without saying another word. I was exhausted and didn't even have the strength to speak. My legs kept trembling, and I didn't even realize when I had fallen asleep. The next morning, Mateo returned with the car fixed and told me we had to pick up Javier and head to the city where he was. I was filled with regret and conflicting emotions, but at the same time, there was excitement within me. As I looked at Mateo, his eyes, his actions, everything about him was affecting me. Everything was so complicated, yet I didn't know what would happen. I couldn't decide between the questions in my mind and the excitement. But there was one thing I knew for sure: this trip would be the moment when everything changed. If you've made it this far, I know my story has moved you. Don't miss out, press the follow button, turn on notifications, and join us by leaving a comment about this story. I can't wait to hear your thoughts.